Right, let's get started. All right. Next Wednesday, today's Friday. On Wednesday, beginning of class, papers are due. I bet we get better turnout because the papers have to be turned in person. We have to have a physical paper. I will not be having office hours on that day. I have to attend a class during my own office hours. But I will be giving a lecture. I'm not missing any lectures. All right, so where were we? We're talking this week about cognition in relationships, about how we think about relationships, which turns out to be really important, almost as important as what we do in relationships. And what we were saying at the time was that behaviors aren't necessarily concrete. They don't necessarily have an inherent meaning. Behaviors are ambiguous. Person looks at you, person stares at you. What does that mean? Well, we have to make that meaning a lot of times. And what I talked about last time was the idea that the meaning we make is affected by the knowledge we already have about relationships. And we went through that in great detail. But an implication of that idea was, or like that, the way I talked about it on Wednesday might have given you the impression that we have this knowledge and it totally determines the meanings that we make. If I think a certain way, I have a certain attachment style, I have a certain beliefs about relationships, that shapes the meaning that I make about a particular experience or behavior. In fact, though, what I want to talk about today is, a lot of times, we have a choice as to the meanings we make of our relationship experiences. And that's kind of the moral of today. The whole point of this lesson, I just gave it away. We actually often have a choice as to the meanings we make. Let me describe a little bit what I mean by making meaning. You have an experience. Somebody says something that doesn't strike you as sensitive. Someone says something like, oh, you know, I don't like what you just said. And it stings. You have that experience. When I say making meaning, I mean, what global implications does that specific behavior have for you? Interpreting means linking a specific experience to a particular global meaning. So for example, a specific experience is you just said something that didn't strike me well, that hurt my feelings. You just criticized me. But there's several global meanings I can make of that. One global meaning is you don't like me. You see how you don't like me is a much more general statement than you just criticized me. You just criticized me is concrete, it's specific. I can say that means I can link it to a global meaning. You don't like me. Or I can link it to a different global meaning. You must have had a bad day today. That's a more global meaning and a different global meaning that changes how I react to the specific thing. My point today is we often have some choice in how we do this. We have some flexibility. Now, last time I talked about how the existing knowledge that we have shapes the meanings we make, and it does. But today I want to talk about that choice thing. I want to emphasize a different aspect of this phenomenon of making meaning. And talk about the choices that we make, even if we don't always know we're making them. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about here. We have a concrete behavior. Oh, my partner seems cold and distant today. Now, I can interpret that in a specific way. She must have had a bad day, or she does not care about me. And then I can interpret it even more globally, too. Well, if she must have had a bad day, then my global meaning is, gosh, what a hard-working partner I have. I feel great now. Or, oi, this is a terrible relationship with no affection in it at all. I feel bad now. These meanings were not inherent in this behavior. This behavior is concrete but ambiguous. The global meaning was a choice that I made. I had some degree of flexibility in whether I went down this path and interpreted the behavior in a way that increases my love, or whether I went down another path and interpreted the behavior in a way that decreases my love. I don't want to overstate the case. We'll talk about the limits of these choices. But for now, I want you to get a sense that there's some flexibility when a particular meaning happens. Now, in this example, I'm talking about making meaning of a behavior at one moment. But it may have struck you that over time, we can interpret the same behavior differently. And this, of course, happens all the time in relationships. Let me give you another example. Imagine you're with a partner who doesn't talk a lot, kind of hangs back, sort of stoic. Well, early on in a relationship, maybe you say, that's just what I like. The strong, silent type, a brooding loner, a rebel. Doesn't have to always express himself. He's so confident he doesn't have to talk. But you can imagine that that same interpretation can change over time. You can imagine a relationship that was declining, a relationship that was not going well, that same exact behavior, which does not change at all, could change its meaning to the perceiver. And I can say later, what did I ever see in this oblivious person who gives nothing back, never has a comment, never has something to say, doesn't seem interested in me? You imagine that in a lot of relationships, what changes isn't the concrete behavior. There's a researcher named Diane Felmley who has studied this process. She asks people in relationships that are just starting out, what's the thing that you love most about your partner? What quality in your partner do you love most? And then she asks the same people or other people in failed relationships, what qualities of your partner did you hate the most that contributed to the breakup of your relationship? And what she found was a lot of parallels in the two lists. A lot of times, the thing that attracted people to their relationships was the very thing that they pointed to later that said was a problem. All that changed was the meaning that they made of it. So you can, for example, saying, I really love that she's spontaneous and impetuous. Well, why did the relationship break up then? Because she was undependable and disorganized. You can imagine those being flip sides, different meanings of basically the same concrete behaviors. I love that she was so affectionate, that she was so open with her emotions. Great. And why did the relationship end? Because she was so emotional and she made a big deal out about everything. You can imagine that the behaviors didn't change in those relationships, in these examples. What changed is the meaning we make of our relationships, of our specific experiences in relationships. Dr. Felmley calls these fatal attractions, when the thing that we're attracted to changes in our heads to the very thing that repels us from the person. So what does this mean for us? It's something worth thinking about. It's hard to keep in mind the fundamental ambiguity of specific experiences in relationships. But if we do keep in mind that any given experience can take on varying meanings, and the meanings matter, because, of course, our emotions and our behaviors are a reaction to the meanings we make, as we've been talking about in these examples, then we want to understand, why do we choose one meaning over another meaning in the moment? Why would we, given that a behavior can be interpreted in a lot of ways, why do we choose one meaning over another? What guides that meaning-making process? Put another way, what determines which global meanings we link to our specific experiences? Well, that's what I want to talk about. And one answer to that question of why we make particular meanings versus other meanings is that it may depend on our motives in the moment. A lot of times, we choose the meaning that fits our goals in the moment. And then the question is, well, then what are our goals? And how do our goals shape the meanings we make in relationships and the ways we interpret our partner's behaviors in relationships? That's what I want to talk about for the next few minutes. Because if you think about it, what do we want to believe? I guess the question is, what do we want to believe about our relationships? What do we want to believe? And the first answer to that question, and indeed the first sort of motive that guides a lot of our meaning-making in relationships, is the motive to believe the best. And it makes sense, right? If you're in a relationship, you want to be confident in the relationship. If you've just said to somebody, hey, you're the one for me. It can be a marriage, obviously, but it can be any kind of relationship where you sort of say, you know what, I'm committing to. I want to show up with you on my arm. I want to introduce you to my friends. Well, if you've gone to that trouble, you're going to look pretty stupid if the relationship is a bad relationship. No. You don't want it to be a bad relationship. You want it to be a good relationship. You don't want to feel doubtful. That's an uncomfortable feeling. You want to think, this relationship that feels so good, it's a terrific relationship. That's a wonderful thing to feel, and you want to feel that way. We are all motivated to believe good things about our relationships. And so this is called, this motive, to the extent that it shapes our thinking, is called the enhancement bias. When I say bias, I mean it's a tendency to favor information that makes our relationship look good. There is a lot of research supporting this point, that people who are in relationships, especially people who are in good relationships, when given a choice between different kinds of meanings or between different kinds of information, strongly favor information that makes their relationship look good. We prefer information that supports and strengthens positive beliefs. Let me give you some examples. So this is all stuff that research has shown. That if you're in a good relationship, and I ask you, tell me about your partner. Tell me about that person you're in a good relationship. Tell me about the person you're in love with. And if I also talk to the person you're in love with and say, tell me about yourself, and I compare your ratings of your partner to your partner's ratings of him or herself, people tend to be much more positive about their partners than their partners are about themselves. Because I could say, oh, you know, I've got good points, I've got bad points, I'm klutzy in these ways. But if you're in love with somebody, you don't want to see the klutziness. Because that might cause doubts about the relationship, and that's unpleasant. We don't want that. So we tend to view our partners, describe our partners far more favorably than our partners describe themselves. In fact, we describe our partners more favorably than their friends describe them. So it's not just that outsiders see people more favorably than they see themselves. Our friends see us quite accurately. Our friends are not motivated to see us better than they see themselves because our friends aren't as interdependent with us, right? So think about your friends. People you like a lot. Do they have no flaws at all? Are they the best people ever? No. They're just your friends. You love them, but there's less motivation to deny that our friends have flaws or faults. But our partner, we're interdependent with our partner, right? My outcomes depend on my partner. So if my partner's got flaws, that's actually threatening. That can be threatening. And I don't like to live with threats. So in study after study, especially among college students, by the way, college students who are in love with their partners rate their partners higher than the friends of those partners rate the partner. The implication there is that there's a greater motive for the partner to see the best. The woman has done this well. Then the last example is, if you ask two people in a relationship, I love this work. There's been a couple of studies that have done this. You ask two people in a relationship, what's your relationship like, and how likely is your relationship to last a year? The people in the relationship will tell you, oh, it's very likely, especially if they're in love or at the beginning of the relationship. It's highly likely. Then the researchers did something that I think is just mean. They went to the friends and family of the couple and asked them the same question. And the friends of the family didn't always agree with the couple, and then they followed them up a year later, and guess who was more likely to be right? The friends and family. Ouch. You do not want to know that information, but it's the truth. You don't want to believe that your mom knows whether your relationship is going to succeed better than you do. But that's what they found in this study. And why? Because the people in the relationship are highly invested in its success. What if I'm in a relationship, it's going great? Now, what if I contemplate the possibility of it failing? Ooh, I don't want that. That's going to be terrible. It's going to be embarrassing. It's going to be painful. There's going to be fights and crying. We'll have to decide whose t-shirts are whose. I do not want to consider that. I don't want to be prepared for that. I'm putting that out of my mind. I'm going to focus on the positive. But my mom has no such motivation. Mom wants what's best for me and is thinking, that person isn't good for you. So your parents, your friends are much more honest. Or rather, your parents and friends are less motivated by an enhancement bias. There's nothing in it. They don't need to believe the best. And they tend to be actually better predictors of the future of the relationship. First, who's done a lot of this work is a woman named Sandra Murray. We talked about her on Wednesday as doing some work on self-esteem, and she did. And she also did this work. And her point is this. It's a very interesting point. She says, look, a relationship, an intimate relationship, really puts us in a bind. And the bind is this. We're close to somebody because they make us happy. But by opening ourselves up to them, by being close to them, we put them in a position to make us unhappy. We're vulnerable. The closer we are to somebody, the happier we let them make us, the more vulnerable we are to pain if the relationship doesn't work out. See, there's a tension there. I want to be close to somebody, but I also want to protect myself from pain. I don't want to be in a position where I might have my heart crushed and stuffed. Sorry. So the point is that she says the enhancement bias helps protect us from the threat. It helps us put the threat out of our mind. We could never open ourselves up truly to another person if we were constantly thinking about the threat of having our hearts broken and stomped on. So we favor the information that says that's not going to happen. It makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. And people have shown this again and again, that we are highly motivated, especially early in the relationship. Now, and a lot of this work has been done on college students. Now imagine how much greater the motivation is for married couples. If college students, if there's someone you've been showing up at parties with, holding hands with, and then, hey, whatever happened to that person you're with? Oh, we broke up. Oh, sorry to hear. But if you're married to somebody, now you've had a wedding, you've got toasters and blenders and monogram towels. If that relationship ends, it's more than embarrassing. You may have children. I mean, it can destroy your life, and of course, this divorce destroys many, many lives. So married couples are highly motivated to engage in this process, to make these choices. Two, when given a choice between an interpretation that makes me happy about the relationship and an interpretation of the same thing that makes me less happy, married couples are highly motivated to choose the enhancing interpretation. And this is one of our motives, to see the best. Melissa. That's true. And yet I'm not aware of strong gender differences in this. You see men and women doing it. Good question, Melissa. So we want to believe the best, but it's not the only thing we want to believe. That's not our only motive. People have talked about other motives in relationships that guide this meaning-making process. And one of them is the motive to be known. The motive to be understood by our partners. That's a different motive. In fact, it's a motive that sometimes operates in contrast to the motive we just talked about. The idea is this. Not only do we want to be confident, but we also want to be in control. We don't want to be surprised. It doesn't feel good to think, I don't know what's coming next. And you can imagine through our evolutionary history, it would be adaptive, highly adaptive, to have an accurate sense of what's going on. Especially in intimate relationships, it doesn't feel good to have someone say, oh, please, I'm looking forward to that gourmet meal you're going to cook for all of our friends if you are not a gourmet cook and don't know what to do in the kitchen. You're going to disappoint. Better to have our partners know us, and better to know our partners accurately. The researcher who's highly associated with research on this is a fellow named Bill Swann. S-W-A-N-N. He's at the University of Texas at Austin. And he identified what he called a bias not for enhancement, not for believing the best at all costs, but for verification. And he put it this way. He says, how do I want my partner to think of me? How do I want my partner to think of me? Do I want my partner to say, you are the best. You are the perfect basketball player, soldier, gourmet cook, everything you do is perfect, even if that's not all true? Or do you want your partner to know you? To know exactly what your strengths and weaknesses are? Bill Swann said, we want our partners to know us. And we want to know our partners accurately, even if that means knowing the flaws. That's quite different from the enhancement bias. The enhancement bias argues we want to know the best. We want to know the positive stuff no matter what. The verification bias says no, there are times when accurate information is highly desirable. Now the question is, well, when do we want to just know positive things and when do we want to know accurate things? And a lot of research shows that transition points in relationships are very key times when this motive becomes a big deal. So, what's a transition point? Well, the transition point is after date number 1, for example. Okay, you've gone, someone set you up. Someone said, oh, you got to meet this person. Okay, you go on a date. You're not in a relationship yet. You just went on one date. Now you've got a choice to make. Is there going to be a second date? You've got a choice to make at the end of the date. Are you going to exchange phone numbers? Or are you going to say, yeah, I'll call you? What is it going to be? Well, you have to base that decision on something. This is when you want accurate information. In fact, now there's other transition points, of course, which is, now you've been together for a long time. What's going to happen next? Are you going to move in together? Are you going to get married? Are you going to introduce each other to each other's family, which is a big step? Or not? Well, how are you going to make those decisions? That's when you find people not necessarily motivated to believe the best, but motivated to figure out what's going on. In fact, at that point, there's a bias called the diagnosticity bias. I love the diagnosticity bias because it describes many films by Woody Allen. And the bias is simply this. It's a belief, you favor information that you think is diagnostic. You favor information that you think reveals deeper truths about the relationship. What makes it a bias is sometimes that information doesn't really reveal anything. But there's a tendency to think maybe it is revealing. So, when people who are thinking, should we get married or break up? Should we get married or is that it? Like, what should we do? Should we move forward or end it? You find them saying, uh-oh, we just had a fight. What's that mean? It's not diagnostic. Does that mean that we're in a good relationship or a bad relationship? You get these people starting to ruminate and think hard about what the meaning of different events is. There's a great scene in a film called Swingers. You ever see the film Swingers? Yeah, a couple people? Well, there's a scene in the film where after having met an attractive person, the lead guy calls her up afterwards and leaves a message on her phone. And if you're already probably giggling if you've seen the film, because what happens is he leaves a message and he starts talking too much and it gets cut off. So he calls back and starts apologizing for the last one because he thinks that she'll interpret his being cut off the first time as she'll think he hung up or something like that. So, but then he's cut off again. So the point is that over the course of like a 10-minute scene, he keeps calling her back, thinking that she's interpreting his messages in a very serious way. Finally, in his last message, and by the way, she's not been part of this at all. It's just been him talking to the message machine. And the last one, he says, I think this isn't working out. And he's just interpreted he's given so much meaning to these messages that he's already convinced himself the relationship's over. Heidi. Yes, absolutely. That would be totally. If you tell your friend, oh, you're overanalyzing, you might also say, oh, you're suffering from the diagnosticity bias. You're seeing too much meaning in behaviors that aren't necessarily diagnostic. You imagine, here's another example of the diagnosticity bias. This is a perfect example of the diagnosticity bias. Let's say you have a crush on the person who serves coffee at Starbucks. So you go in and you go up to the counter and you say, hi, I'd like my latte. And the person says, okay, and you say, here's my credit card, and they say, okay, and they hand it back to you, and they say, okay, Mr. Carney, or maybe they'll even call you by your first name, Ben, and then you say, oh, they know my first name. They must be paying attention to me. I must be a special customer, because why would she call me by my first name? Now, of course, it is right there on your credit card most of the time. So that would be an example of the diagnosticity bias. So if there's someone you like, and they sort of like say, oh, can you pass the salt? And you're like, oh, they talk to me. That would be another example of the diagnosticity bias. Danielle.
So this one is something that's both ways. We want our partners to know us and we want to know them.
Yes. We want to know our partners accurately. That's the diagnosticity bias. And we want to be known. That's the verification bias. The verification bias is I want people to know me. Now, a lot of times, the verification bias and the enhancement bias can go hand in hand. For example, if you've got high self-esteem, if you think that you're pretty hot stuff, then wanting your partner to like you and wanting your partner to know you is the same thing. Because you think if your partner knows you, they will like you because you think you have good qualities. Nice work if you can get it. Robbie?
But sometimes seems to bother us when our partners know us. Like when they say, "I know you're stubborn." No, I'm not. You don't know.
Oh, well, wait a minute. So Robbie, you contradict yourself. You said it bothers us when our partners know us. But then the example you gave was your partner saying you're stubborn. You're like, no, I'm not stubborn. Well, what's irritating you is not being known. What's irritating you is, in that example, at least as you describe it, Robbie, is when someone says that you're stubborn, you're like, no, I deny that. What irritates me is you're calling me stubborn, that's not me, I don't recognize myself then. The problem is, what about people who are stubborn? Or worse, poor people who are depressed. Now, why is depression a really bad disease? It's one of the reasons it's a really bad disease is it really has significant negative effects on interpersonal relationships. And this is another example. If we have a bias to be known, if we want our partners to know us, and if it makes us irritated in the same way as Robbie's example, to be misunderstood, if we don't like to be misunderstood, then what if you have low self-esteem? What if you're depressed? What if you think poorly of yourself? If you have a verification bias, now that would operate against an enhancement bias. Now, in people who are depressed, if the verification bias is true, would actually get their partners to think worse of them. Would actually be trying to convince their partners to think poorly of them because that's how they think of themselves, and they want their partners to know them. Let me tease apart the psychology here. If you have low self-esteem, you think poorly of yourself. What's the threat? The threat is that your partner will discover it and then reject you. That if your partner likes you, your partner must be fooled, must not know you well enough to know all the negative qualities that you have. So you're constantly in this state of doubt, always wondering, when are they going to discover the truth and finally turn me out? So you can't trust your partner's love if you are depressed and have these feelings. The only way that you can begin to trust your partner's love is by knowing that your partner actually knows you. So you're in a position of saying, wait a minute, the only way I can trust that you love me is to know that you love me despite all of my many, many flaws. I need to know that you know those flaws. So depressed people do a lot of self-verifying, a lot of reminding their partners of how negative they are. At the same time, and this is interesting, at the same time that the depressed people are seeking out negative behavior from their partners. Let me give an example of the way this research is done. I give you a list of 10 questions, and I say, you can give this list, you can choose 5 questions from this list and have your partner answer them about you. Half the questions are questions that are phrased to elicit positive information. Like, what are your 3 favorite things about this person? What do you enjoy most about this person's company? That's a positive question. The answer is going to be a nice thing. I'm going to enjoy that. It's going to be positive. The negative questions would be, what are your partner's 3 biggest flaws? What are the things about your partner that you find the most irritating or the most difficult to tolerate? Depressed people select more of the negative questions to get answered by their partner. Depressed people are actually choosing, given a choice, they choose the questions that would get negative feedback. Danielle?
And is that because they know they'll be able to see the answers?
Yeah, they do know that they're able to see the answers. Exactly right. So the idea is that depressed people actually elicit information that unfortunately then makes them feel a little bit more depressed to know their partners feel this way. And of course their partners then say, hey, come to think of it, yeah, you do have a lot of flaws, and their relationships are, less successful because of that. Which is a negative cycle for depressed people that, partly accounts for why depressed people have less successful relationships. It's a tough one. Is it Vicky? Oh. Yes, they go together, but they're not entirely the same. But they have some overlap, a great deal of overlap. But you're right, they're not entirely the same. Is it Roger? Lawrence, sorry.
So they choose to be asked negative questions?
They choose to ask their partners negative questions. They choose to have their partners ask negative questions about themselves.
Okay.
They solicit negative feedback.
Is that more of a verification bias?
that was a perfect example of verification bias. A preference for information that verifies what you already believe about yourself. Tell me your name again. Jasper, right.
Yeah, but isn't it possible that someone may choose next questions to find out what they're not doing well and do better in the business?
Wow, Jasper, well, that's a great point. I wasn't going to get into the details, but since you raised them, some research, this is a controversial idea. And a number of people hate it and think it's wrong. And so there's been a lot of fights. I didn't really want to get into it, but again, Jasper opened the door. So the idea is, well, when people want negative information about themselves, why do they want it? Does it feel good to hear bad things about themselves? Turns out, no. It doesn't feel good. But it turns out that if you ask people to choose between negative information that will maybe help them do better, or negative information that they can't control, people's preference for negative information about themselves is much stronger if it's on a dimension that they think that they can change or control or improve on. So Jasper says, and he's right, that you see a bigger verification bias for dimensions that we might conceivably improve upon, and much less of a verification bias for dimensions that are stable and never changing. So for example, if I ask you, are you attracted to my nose? Do you think that's a nice nose? I have an enhancement bias because I really want to know that you like my nose because there's nothing I can do about it, probably. I'm not going to get nose jobs. But if it's something I could maybe change, like, was it the way I talked to your parents irritating? The fact that I was constantly laughing, that sort of high-pitched laugh that I had? Well, if you say it's irritating, oh, well, maybe I can change that, maybe I can behave differently or something. The broader point here is that we don't always want to hear the best thing. It's not always true that we want to hear the best things about ourselves. Sometimes we want to hear true things, or what we think are accurate things. That's another motive that we have. But even this isn't the only motive that we have that shapes the meanings we make in relationships. We also have a motive, a personal motive, to be right. This won't shock you. People are highly motivated to feel justified, to feel right and appropriate. We look out for ourselves, and we want to protect our interests. And this bias is called the self-serving bias. We can see many, many examples of this, especially when relationships are not going well. If there's a conflict, if you're having a fight, who started it? I'll tell you who started it. Not me, that's who started it. And by the way, if we're having a fight, and someone's being unreasonable in this fight, which one of us is it likely to be? I'll tell you who. Not me, that's for sure. If one of us is being unreasonable, here's who it is, you. Well, why would I choose that interpretation? Well, because of the self-serving bias, because I don't want to feel wrong. I absolutely am highly motivated not to believe that I made problems in our relationship, that I caused you pain. That doesn't feel good. I'd much rather believe that you caused me pain. Because then I can say, I'm mad at you, which is a little easier than being guilty for causing you pain. So there's lots of research on this, that if you ask people, tell me about your fight. Tell me about the last fight that you had. What happens in couples is an interesting phenomenon called chunking. Chunking, like creating chunks of behavior. Given the same fight, if you ask two people who had a fight, who are in an intimate relationship, how did the fight start and when did it start? What's interesting is that each person can see a different beginning to when the fight started. Each member of the couple says, no, it started here when you did this bad thing. And the other person says, no, I was just a response to you. You're the one that started. Because when you walked in the door, you said that mean thing. And I come back and say, no, I didn't say a mean thing. I was just coming in, just putting my keys down, and you hassled me immediately. Now, they're not arguing about the behavior. Someone came in the door, someone put the keys down, a fight happened. None of that's in dispute. The question is, which was the behavior that started the fight? The self-serving bias says that given a choice, we frequently choose the interpretation and the meaning that protects ourselves The problem with the self-serving bias, as you might imagine, is that it favors the self over the relationship. And that's usually a bad sign. And that's why in relationships that are going badly, you see a lot of the self-serving bias. People say, it's not, I didn't do this, you did it. So my point about motives is that we have different things that we want in relationships. Sometimes we want to do right. Sometimes we want to be known. Sometimes we just want to relax and say, we just want to know that this is a good relationship. And at various times, when we have choices to make about the meanings of experiences that we have, these motives guide our choices. So it's an active process. When I described meaning making on Wednesday, it sounded a little passive. It sounded like, well, you have an experience and based on what's in your head, you just have a reaction. Today I'm trying to paint a picture of us as much more active, that we're consciously involved in the process. So let's say you want to believe a certain thing about your relationship. Let's say you want to believe you're in a good relationship, which most people do. How do we do it? How specifically can we do it? There's been a lot of research on the mechanisms of this stuff, different techniques that we have to interpret things our way. I want to go into some detail about them because they're kind of interesting. Once you identify these, you see them everywhere. So for example, again, think of yourself as, as a newlywed couple. Imagine yourself in a newlywed couple or some young couple just fallen in love. Among your motives, you may want to be right, you may want to be known, but you're highly invested. If you're in the beginning of a relationship, especially a marriage, you're highly invested to stay happy. This is essentially, what we're talking about is essentially one of the key questions of the course, which is, what do people do who are happy to stay happy? Well, one of the questions is, one of the ways is this. Plan A, keep negative information out of awareness. If there's something negative in this relationship, I do not want to know about it. First of all, I want there to be no negative information. So if there is something negative, I don't want to think about it. I don't want to have to admit to myself or to others that there might be problems in this relationship. You can imagine how bad that would feel if you're on your way to the altar or coming back from the altar. Well, there's some research on how do I do this? How do I keep negative information away from attention? And there's a number of different, very interesting mechanisms. One is the mechanism of selective attention. And selective attention is exactly what you think it is, which is, if I'm highly motivated to be happy, I selectively attend to the positive aspects of the relationship and ignore or limit the attention I pay to the negative aspects. Makes perfect sense. And there's research on this. And the way that research goes is it's kind of clever. They get people who are in good relationships, college students, this was a particular study, college students, but people who are in good relationships and happy with their relationships. And they ask them to come into the lab and rate the physical attractiveness of other college students. And they're shown a bunch of pictures of highly attractive college students of the opposite sex in this particular study. The dependent variable was how much time people spent looking at the attractive photos, at each attractive photo. And what they found was the happier you were with your own relationship, the less time you spent gazing at the photos of the attractive other college students. And that was seen as an example of selective attention, is that if you're in a good relationship, the last thing in the world you need is to know that there are other very attractive potential partners for you. That would be threatening. That might make you question, have you made the right decision? No one needs that. So instead, people who were highly happy with their relationships really flipped through the pictures quite quickly. They didn't want to spend a lot of time gazing at the photos. People who were in no relationships or who were in less good relationships spent a lot more time processing the photos of the attractive potential partners. That's just one example of selective attention. Heidi. What's your thought about that? So Heidi asks, Would that phenomenon be different if people were in either a city or an urban setting? Well, what's your hypothesis? Heidi's idea is that the more potential partners there are for you in a population, the less committed you will be to your own partner. That's not this study, but there have been studies of that exact phenomenon, which show that, this is demographers who've done this work, and the demographers have said, let's look at the number of single people in a particular, let's say, census block, and look at divorce rates in that block. Are people more likely to break up with their partners if there's a lot of single potential available other partners in the neighborhood who are the same age? And the answer is yes. That's not exactly the same as selective attention. Selective attention is saying, if you're in that neighborhood and there's lots of potential partners and you want to protect your relationship, here's one way to do it. Try not to leave the house. Another mechanism is called empathic accuracy. And the question is this: when are we best able to know what our partner is thinking? When are we most accurate at understanding our partner's emotions? And the way they've studied this is they basically got people into the lab, had them do an interaction, and then afterwards had each person report on what they were thinking and feeling in the moment, and then report on what they think their partners were thinking and feeling in the moment. What they find is that if your partner is thinking good thoughts about you, people would tend to be more accurate. And it felt good to be accurate. But if your partner is thinking bad thoughts about you, this study found less accuracy. People were basically less willing to read their partners accurately when doing so would have revealed negative feelings in your partner. Basically a bias towards keeping negative information out of awareness. In the relationship studies that were studied in that particular study, that were examined in that study, people protected themselves by being less accurate when their partner had negative things in their head. And finally, keep negative information out of awareness. Memory bias is a way to do that. Basically, forget the negative stuff. Imagine that the negative stuff, when you think back on the history of your relationship, people who are in good relationships will say, well, we actually studied what they said. This is actually work that I did. And here's how we did it. We wanted to know, do people remember the past in a motivated way? Well, what would the motive be? Why would you remember the past? What motives would you have to remember the past? And the idea would be, well, if I want to believe that I'm in a good relationship, I want to believe that the history of the relationship is one that should make me feel optimistic. I should believe that the relationship is getting better and better and better. Here's the problem. We've already talked about this so many times, of course. Relationships don't get better and better, right? Relationships over time get a little bit less satisfied over time. It starts out really passionate, and then they get a little bit less satisfied over time. Well, that's an unpleasant thing to have to face. Nobody wants to say, oh, our relationship used to be really good, it used to be really awesome, and now it's less awesome. What they want to say is, our relationship's getting better and better. Well, how can you do both? And what if your relationship really does have challenges? What do you do when your relationship really does have challenges? To address how people were managing these problems, what we did was we studied them every 6 months for 4 years, and we got how happy they were every time. And at the end of the 4 years, we said, by the way, over the last 4 years, how happy were you every 6 months? So we asked them to remember how happy they had been over the last 4 years, even though we knew exactly what had happened to their happiness over those same 4 years. Does that make sense? So we could plot them. We could actually draw a line of what their happiness looked like over 4 years, and then compare it to the line of how they remembered their happiness over the 4 years. You see what the comparison is. Let me show you what that looks like. Zing. The top line is how their relationships actually developed. They started out really happy, and then they declined. And this was true for the wives, and this is true for the husband. This line is what really happened. We measure them here, 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 and this is what happened. Gradual decline over time. Is that what they remembered? No. Nobody's telling us that their marriage gradual decline. What they said is, oh, there was some decline at the beginning, sure. We were newlyweds, and then we had, we can't be newlyweds forever. But lately, things have been just going up and up and up. In fact, we call this paper the we've been getting better lately effect. With the idea being that the more you're able to say, hey, lately we've been doing better, the more you're saying, well, I don't recognize that we've actually, in fact, been declining lately. And in fact, it makes you optimistic for the future. If you've been getting better lately, the implication is we're going to keep getting better, and isn't that awesome? Is that Megan? What's up? Well, Megan, I think the question Megan is asking from the back there is, what's really going on here? Is it that they're misremembering the past? That's one possibility. Another possibility is that they're reinterpreting the past. Is that they're saying, oh, I thought I was happy, but I wasn't really happy. Now I'm really happy. I don't know, Megan, did I understand your issue correctly? That's true. They're misremembering the past that's true. They're misremembering the past as less happy than it actually was. That's true. And now in fact they're remembering all of the past as less happy than it actually was. Why? Well, I'll tell you why. If they started out here, if they said, no, when we were newlyweds, we're here, this is almost at the ceiling. It's very hard to then say, and we've gotten even better since then, because then you have to be super happy, perfectly happy. You have to be off the scale. Most people will acknowledge that they're not off the scale. They're happy. In order to feel like you've gotten better over time, you actually have to misremember the past as less happy, or else you just can't get that feeling of improvement. Does that make sense, Megan? Question over here, Micah.
How do you know that the high scores that the community were reported weren't due to a social desirability effect? Because here we're in a brand new relationship, and so hey, it's great because new relationships
should be great. Well, I don't know. Well, Micah says maybe this first number that they reported at the time when they were newlyweds is just social desirability effect. What I would ask you, Micah, though, is, well, then why wouldn't they remember the same? Why wouldn't social desirability affect their memory as well? Isn't it just as desirable to remember that you were as happy back then?
Well, I would say that it's easier to reflect on the past that things were bad and they got better because it's less social desirability. If you're in the moment, then the social desirability is more important than in the past.
Fair enough. Well, that's an interesting point. Micah's point is, as your history gets farther back, it's easier to say, oh yeah, we weren't that happy then, but now we're really happy. You see that a lot when people talk about themselves in high school. Most people are not going to say, yes, I am an awkward nerd right now. But it's much easier to say, oh, I was an awkward nerd in high school. Because high school was far, far away, farther away for some than for others. So yes, I think there's a part of that, Mike. Is that it's easier to say bad things are happening in the past than to say they're happening now. But I might also interpret, it's totally consistent to say that my enhancement bias, my desire to actually believe good things is stronger for things that are current than for things that are in the past. That's all actually, I think, consistent with the point, which is that people are constructing these memories in ways that feel good in the moment, for whatever reason. David? Good question. That's a great question. David asks, are people aware that this is going on? Do people know that they're doing this? Or is this unconscious? What do you think? What do you think, David? David thinks it's mostly unconscious. Others? Other thoughts on that? I would have to agree with David. I think it's mostly unconscious. These people didn't say, we asked them to remember accurately. I said, please tell me accurately what's been going on with you over the last 4 years. I said, try to remember what you gave, what scores, what information you gave us. And this is the average trend, but they're giving us, very different different course over time than they showed us the first time. The implication of that is that they don't remember, and they don't know. I don't think people know that they're doing this bias at all. It's what we predicted we'd see, but I don't think people know it at all. People generally think of themselves as being as trying to be objective. So I think these are unconscious processes. Arthur. I'm having trouble hearing you, Arthur. Yeah, I mean, so he's saying, look, so people are only accurate about the present. I think that's about right. Is that so? At time 8, their memory is, we're saying, so tell me what you gave us 2 minutes ago, and they're pretty accurate here, a little less accurate there, but yeah, they know how happy they are today at this moment, but their memory is not so accurate. That's come up a lot in this course, right? We've asked people to remember their behaviors, asked people to remember also, when did the argument start? Once you get into the past, there's more flexibility, more ambiguity, and motivated reasoning can shape what the answers that you get. Danielle. Fantastic question. That last slide will address this issue. This is essentially what happy couples were doing in our sample. What do unhappy couples do? We'll get to that. So let's say you want to be happy, though. Let's assume that you want to be happy, and what you're trying, and one way to do it, this is a way of denying that you've had negative changes, at least recently. And we've talked a lot about these mechanisms that sort of keep negative information out of awareness. But what if negative information is in awareness and there's nothing you can do about it? You've had a fight, you can't pretend that you didn't have a fight. Something bad happened, you can't pretend that something bad didn't just happen. Okay, plan A you can't do, so let's retreat to plan B. Plan B is minimize negative information. If you can't ignore negative information, what you can say is, okay, it's negative, but it doesn't matter. That's plan B. Yes, it's negative, but it's not important. It doesn't affect me. It means nothing. Honey, she meant nothing to me. So, how do you do this? So again, there's some research that talks about specific techniques of doing that. And one is the idea of flexible standards. So we talked on Wednesday about the ideal standards model, right? How we can compare what we're doing in the relationship to our ideals and our standards for the relationship. And if we fall short, we're unhappy. Well, what if I don't want to be unhappy? Well, it's hard to change the relationship, but it's easy to change my standards. I can just say, oh, my standards are different now. We did research on this. Well, we did. Here's how we did. We asked newlyweds, the same newlyweds that we've been studying for years. We asked them, tell me about these 8 relationship standards. How important is it for your relationship that you have, that your communication is good, that your sex life is good, that you share interests, that you express affection? There's like 8 specific things, and we said, how important is this to you? In other words, what are your standards? Your standards are, which of these things really matter a lot, which of these things don't matter that much? And then we also said, oh, and by the way, in your relationship, how are each of these 8 things going? What we found, and I don't think it'll surprise you, is that the happiest couples were the ones who said, you know those things I told you that were important to me? Well, those are the best things in our relationship. And the other things I told you that weren't important to me? Those are the worst things in our relationship. The happy couples say that the positive things are really important and the negative things are really unimportant. But we didn't stop there. We followed the couples over time and we kept asking them these questions. And what we found was, of course, their perceptions of the relationship changed over time. Some couples that started out really affectionate got less affection. Some people who had a great sex life, sometimes less good sex life. Some people had gotten more dependable, though, or they started sharing more interest or less interest. The relationship changed. the question we asked was, do standards change also? So if you said early in the relationship, oh, showing affection is really important to me, and we show a lot of affection, so that's why I'm happy. What happens when you're now showing less affection? The happiest couples were the couples who changed their standards to meet their changing relationships. The happiest couples showed flexible standards. So it was interesting. The happiest couples, their standards were all over the place. So now, 2 years later, we're asking you, so now what's important to you? And they're like, oh, what's important to me now? They didn't say, yes, it's changed. We didn't say, have your standards changed. Because I don't think it's a conscious process, as David pointed out. We just said, what are your standards today? And people said, oh, here are my standards today. And they happen to be, the more different they were, the more resilient the marriage. This is a way of saying, if there's a negative change, it doesn't matter, because my standards are different now. You change your standards so that changes in the relationship don't affect you as much. Make sense? Robbie?
I'm curious, was there also like bi-directional relationship where they change their behavior to fit their standards?
Oh.
Within the standards, maybe?
That's possible. So Robbie says, well, maybe they change the behavior to fit the standards. That's also possible. It's a good point. Another mechanism of minimizing negative information is called derogating alternatives. Ooh, I love this one. Similar to the selective attention research. Basically, you get people into your laboratory who are either in committed good relationships or are single or are in bad relationships. And you confront them with an attractive alternative. You basically say, oh, and by the way, we're going to be pairing people up. And here's a person who, we've said would be paired up with you. And it's a person who's an attractive member of the opposite sex. Or in this, that's what they were studying here. The question is, everyone's asked, rate the attractiveness of the person in this picture. That's it. Very simple question. How attractive to you is the person in that picture? Now, everyone gets the same picture. So, everyone should agree about the attractiveness of that person, right? It's all the same picture. But no. The single people say, hey, that's an attractive person. The people in bad relationships say, hey, that's an attractive person. The people in committed good relationships say, not so attractive. What's going on? Why should those people be less sensitive to the attractiveness of that person? Just a picture, after all. Well, the idea is that, the presence of an attractive alternative could be threatening. So I minimize that threat. I don't ignore the picture. I've been forced to look at the picture, but I minimize it by saying it's just not that attractive. You'll see people do that. Oh, Micah.
So does that mean that people in good committed relationships actually rate the attractiveness, the general attractiveness of that person lower, or does their personal attractiveness do that lower?
They rate the physical attractiveness of that person lower. They look at the picture and they say, that person is not that physically attractive. Just not. Victoria's Secret model does nothing for me. I don't think that's very attractive at all. Honey? Lawrence?
What you just said right there?
Yes?
Is that why they did that?
Well, no, their partner wasn't in the room. Their partner wasn't even in the room.
I mean, is it like guilt?
Well, what is it? What is it? It's a good question, Lawrence. That's what he's asking. Well, let's think about it. Why do I do that? Why would somebody derogate alternatives? If you're in a committed, good, solid relationship, why would you look at a picture there? Oh, that's not so attractive. Why? But what are you protecting? Yes. You're protecting the relationship from the threat of, maybe I desire somebody outside the relationship. Ooh, that would be threatening, wouldn't it? It wouldn't be good for my relationship to desire someone besides my partner. So, I minimize that threat by derogating alternative partners. And you do see that in satisfying relationships. What's your name? Natalie. It's a different phenomenon, but also a phenomenon that we mentioned. So, for example, the other question is, if I give you a picture of your partner, your current partner, how attractive is your current partner? If you're in a happy relationship, super attractive. I give that same picture to everyone else in the room. I have to say that most of the time your ratings will be higher than everyone else in the room. So that's a different bias, right? That's an enhancement bias. That's saying, I'm seeing my partner as super attractive, as a bias to see my partner as attractive. No one else in the room is biased to see your partner as super attractive, and they don't. Depending on your partner. Question? Other? No? Lucas?
How is, or is there much difference between derogating alternatives in this case and devaluing alternatives as far as having a low CLO for social exchange? Or are they similar?
They're the same. Derogating and devaluing means the same thing. So, minimize negative information. I can change my standards. I'll say, oh, that doesn't matter to me. It used to matter to me. It doesn't matter to me anymore. I used to think that a relationship should be about passion and holding hands and all sorts of great things, and now I changed my mind. Now it's about commitment and dependability and having a stable person to take care of you when you're old. I don't care about passion. Who needs passion? Well, that would be a great change of standards if, in fact, the passion in your relationship has declined. Derogating alternatives protect you, is why it says, from the threat of being attracted to others. Adaptive attributions. What's an attribution? An attribution, of course, is an explanation for a behavior. We've been talking about that all day. How do I explain my partner's behavior? Well, one way, what if my partner's behavior is negative? My partner was late. We had a date, you didn't show up in time. Well, one thing I can do is, I can say, well, I can make an adaptive explanation. I can favor explanations that forgive you. Oh, you must have been stuck in traffic. Happy couples make adaptive attributions for their partner's negative behaviors. If I'm in a good relationship and my partner does something negative, I am more likely to come up with an attribution, i.e. an explanation, that forgives you, that explains the behavior in a way that doesn't blame you for it. Unhappy couples do the opposite. If you have negative, they maximize negative information, but we'll talk about that in a moment. So, forgiving you, explaining away your behavior. Oh, you were just, here's an extreme example. Why did you scream and yell at me and throw a clock against the wall? Oh, you love me too much. That's the harmful side of this, which we'll talk about in a moment. But that would be minimizing negative information. The negative information is, you lost your temper. The adaptive attribution is, it's because you love me too much. Let's see an example of this. I'm trying to think of an example of some case where there's a couple and one person acted really awfully, and there's lots of good documented examples of the partner of that person trying to minimize the negative information. Let me think. What can I come up with here? Oh, that guy. And that one. And that one. Now, 1999, 10 years ago, some of you were 10 years old? Well, maybe you didn't follow that story quite as closely as I did, since I was a grown-up at the time, but the point is that maybe if you remember that the history of our country was tremendously shaped by the fact that Bill Clinton had a sexual dalliance with Monica Lewinsky, an intern, and many people believe that this was one of the reasons why Al Gore didn't win the election, or didn't decisively win the election, and the history of our country was shaped by that fact. So there was no dispute that this man, President of the United States, engaged in tawdry sexual behavior with an intern, Monica Lewinsky, while he was simultaneously married to Hillary Rodham Clinton. Very bad behavior. Now, Hillary Rodham Clinton is highly motivated to stay married to this man. Highly motivated. Because she was thinking, perhaps, I might like to run for president someday. And it would look bad to divorce an old president. So what did she do about it? So we got the motivation. The question is, what's the mechanism? And yet there's no disputing the behavior. There's no way to ignore the negative information. It's there. So she had to rely on plan B, minimize the negative information. So how'd she do it? Let's say some quotes from this same article in the LA Times. Everyone has dysfunction in their families. You don't walk away if you love someone, you help the person. What's she doing there? She's engaging in a mechanism called social comparison. She's saying, this is normal. Come on, everyone has a little dysfunction. So she's saying, it's not a big deal. That's one of the mechanisms. She's minimizing the negativity by saying, everybody does it. And what's normal, and it's good to help people through it. Also, the next mechanism is, she says, he's a very, very good man. He did a bad thing, doesn't make him a bad person. What she's doing is she's saying the behavior is very specific. He did the stuff with Monica Lewinsky, doesn't make him a bad guy. She's not linking it to, and therefore he's a cad and a bad person. No, she's saying he's still a very good man. I'm separating the specific event from my global impression of my husband. How about this one? We did have a very good stretch, years and years of nothing following Jennifer Flowers. So this is now a memory bias. Actually, what that is an example of selective attention. She's saying, well, let's see, even though every single day the newspaper is full of details about his affair and dalliance, I'm going to focus on the good stretch. Years and years of nothing following the last time that he had a sexual affair with someone else. So this is a perfect example of selective attention right there in the news. And finally, when in doubt, in Christian theology there are sins of weakness and sins of malice. And this was a sin of weakness. An example of, if you had to pick, it's an example of attribution bias. She's saying, he committed a sin. We're not denying the sin. Why did he do it? Out of malice? In other words, malice would be intentional meanness. Ooh, that would be bad. Hard to overlook that. Or out of weakness. He couldn't help himself. Well, you can forgive that. If he can't help himself, you can hardly be mad at somebody who can't help himself. And she's choosing that this is a sin of weakness. She's choosing an attribution that allows her to forgive him. That is a great example of motivated reasoning. So, now 5 minutes to pick up this crucial, we're ending on a high note here. This is a crucial point. I've spent the entire hour so far saying we have a lot of flexibility to believe what we want to believe in relationships. I've shown you how a lot of times, even when someone is having an affair on the front page of the paper, there's still flexibility to interpret it in ways that allow us to protect our feelings about the relationship. Well, maybe you're thinking, well, wait a minute then. If we can do that, if we have that ability, why does the relationship end? How do the relationships ever change if we have the super ability to do that? Well, there's two reasons. And this is, by the way, crucial to answering our question for the whole course. If we can believe what we want to believe to this degree that we've been talking about, through all these mechanisms of ignoring the negative, why would we ever say, uh-oh, we do have to get a divorce. Uh-oh, we do have to break up. We have to go through the pain. Why would you go through the pain if you didn't have to? Well, here's why. There are limits to our ability to explain stuff away. There are limits. Negative experiences don't disappear. They accumulate. We might say, oh, that didn't matter. Oh, and that didn't matter either. And that one didn't matter either. But it doesn't go away. And what occasionally happens is these things accumulate to a point where you can't forgive anymore. When you've had this many experiences and people's thresholds differ, it reaches a point where some things, the point is negative experiences accumulate and in some relationships beyond our ability to minimize them. Another problem is that some specific things cannot or should not be explained away. Some people have different criteria for things that cannot be minimized. I don't know what yours are, but maybe you've got them. Something in your life that, oh, I can minimize this. I've got some flexibility here. I don't have flexibility here. There's no minimizing that. Maybe it's physical violence. Maybe for you, the rule is, if you lay a finger on me, it's over that second. Maybe that's your rule. In that case, there's stuff you can change your standards on, but that standard you're not going to change. So my point is that our ability to do this is considerable, but it's not infinite. You cannot just think yourself a good relationship. There has to be some elements to put together. You have to have good experiences to focus on. If you don't have them, then you're limited. There's limits of ability. We have to have the ability. We have to have one other thing too. We have to have the motive. And some people, their motive is stronger than others. Hillary Clinton's motive, was really strong. She was in the newspaper. Everyone was watching to see what she was going to do. Was she going to stand by her man? And the implication was if she didn't, there was something wrong with her. That's not a judgment that I would make, but that's a judgment that many would have made at the time. The more dependent you are on the relationship, the more motivated you are to do this stuff. The less dependent you are, as Heidi was pointing out earlier. If you're not dependent on the relationship, if you've got plenty of people around that you could date instead of this person that you're dating, you're going to be less motivated to see the best in this relationship. And it better actually be the best, or else I'm going to find something else. You might wonder, wow, celebrities, famous celebrities seem to break up with each other a lot. Why is that? Why don't they do more work on it? Why don't they protect their relationships more? I'm looking at you, Brad Pitt. Well, here's why. Because you're not that dependent. If Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie broke up tomorrow, how many days would it be that Brad would be alone and brokenhearted? My guess is his ability to find another partner who might also be extremely attractive is pretty high. He's not dependent. So his motivation to engage in all these cognitive mechanisms is very low. For the rest of us, though, our motivation may vary. May vary with a lot of things. The more dependent we are in our relationship, the more motivated we'll be to do this stuff. There's research on this which I love. That's called it's the commitment calibration hypothesis. The commitment calibration hypothesis, I'll tell you in 60 seconds, is simply this. Our tendency to derogate alternatives depends on the nature of the threat. So the research they did was this. They gave people two conditions. In one condition, if you're in a good relationship, they gave you attractive photos of somebody who you hadn't met and who doesn't know anything about you. And what they found was the people in the good relationships, okay, I'm going to say it clearly. The people in the very good relationships didn't derogate. The people in the best relationships didn't derogate. They said, yeah, that person's very attractive. Why didn't they? Why, I would say, because they weren't threatened. The only reason I would ever derogate a picture to say that person's not attractive is if I'm threatened by it. Otherwise, there's no motive. If I'm not threatened, well, yeah, that person on the screen, I can look at my wife and say, that actress is very attractive. Wouldn't you say Julia Roberts? Yeah, she's cute. The problem is, if you turn up the threat, then the threat is calibrated to your level of commitment. You can then you get derogation at different levels. So in the first condition of the study, they said rate these pictures, and the happiest people didn't derogate. In the second condition of the study, they said, see the people in these pictures? They've seen your picture, and they'd like to go out with you. Oh, really? That changed it. Suddenly the happiest people were derogating like mad. In other words, your motivation changes, and you have to be motivated to engage in this. I have another slide. It's not crucial. All I need you to say is, all I need to point out in the last slide is, all these things that we're showing today, we talked about protecting relationships. In bad relationships, these same things hurt relationships. If you're unhappy and you want to get out, you can just flip it around. See the negative, focus on the negative, and that's a way of justifying leaving. Speaking of leaving, class dismissed.